tired of seeing responsible bars and restaurants get punished and picking up the tab for the law-breaking bars, and it's wrong the way these things get rated.
Well, what a week at the State House last week, where the order of the day or the order of the week is what folks order when they belly up to the bar. In fact, we're talking about liquor liability and a number of issues that come along with it in the state of South Carolina, according to the way the laws are currently written. And there has not been much movement since that soundbite you heard there that was part of a day-long series of hearings at the State House complex on Thursday. But here we are on this Sunday getting ready to get you connected to the Capitol with our very good friends Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson, who are here to break all this down for us. Liquor liability. Why does it matter to me? That's what everyone at home wants to know. I think we do know how it matters, because some businesses are closing, but the reason for that is skyrocketing insurance rates. And there is no ironclad formula about how my business could be charged as opposed to another business for this liquor liability insurance.
That's exactly right. Since the 2017 dram shop law revisions, there is a totally new system that makes a lot of lawyers happy, but not a lot of small businesses, especially your restaurants, your bars. Basically, if maybe you get off work at 5 p.m., you go and have a little beverage with some of your coworkers. And then you may go out after that. Maybe you have a few too many, get in a wreck. Someone wants to sue you. They can sue not only you, but also every single place you went that served you any kind of alcohol after 5 p.m. And why that matters is because now every single one of those establishments has to have a minimum of $1 million in liability. And someone who's been injured, someone who is suing, can go after not just you, but every single one of those places for the full amount. Now, no one's saying that you shouldn't have redress, you shouldn't be able to get justice, but that one place that served you one drink back at 5:02 p.m. should not be liable for $1 million when it was some bad bar, a bad actor, 5 hours later that really did the wrong here and served you, your couple six-packs. Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen now since that was passed, almost 8 years ago now, is that the rates have gone up astronomically because the insurance companies see that, man, we might have a heck of a payout here. Some of them are even choosing not to underwrite such a policy for some of these businesses. And we were talking about data. What is it? What is the rate they're charging? Well, basically what I could find was anecdotal data from business to business saying mine went from $30,000 a year to $130,000 a year. Then you have another business that says mine went from $50,000 a year to $250,000 a year in premiums. That's not feasible.
It's not feasible, and we were talking with a restaurant owner in the upstate not that long ago. He said, I went from paying $5,000 a year for liability insurance to $50,000. Now imagine that's a lot of liquor to buy and a lot of liquor that has to be sold to be able to make up a $45,000 difference. And that is hurting small businesses. Look around your community. Think about the restaurants that have closed. There's several shops that are here in town. Savage Craft is not one of those, but River Rat was in Columbia, South Carolina.
No longer in business.
No longer in business. So you had a craft beer location right over there off of Shop Road, right next to the stadium. Could not remain in business because it was just too expensive to be in business. And we're in a situation right now where lawyers are looking for every opportunity to stack dollar on dollar on dollar to get the biggest payout possible, when the reality is we also have people who need to have a level of responsibility in how much they drink. So you've got, how well do you train your employees? How well are you monitoring how much they're drinking? And things along those lines. And that is a level of experience, that's a level of understanding. And this is a place where insurance companies are saying, we don't know that we can cover the possibility that you could be sued. And in that particular case, some of them are simply saying, we're done. We're not going to be doing this in South Carolina, or we're going to charge you such high rates that you're not going to even be able to remain.
You're not going to want to.
No.
Another thing that became part of the conversation that probably wasn't thought of by us observers, hours of meetings at the State House, House committee, Senate subcommittee, talked about this for a long time on Thursday. It was rates of impaired driving in this discussion. We're not good in this state when it comes to that. We got another soundbite from some lawmakers from both the House and Senate that talked about that this has to be part of the discussion.
Clearly, the goal and problem we're trying to address is the skyrocketing insurance rates. But the part that seems to get left out of the discussion often is that the fact remains we're number 3 in the country in per capita for DUI.
It's having an impact not just on liquor liability situations, it's having an impact on business in general in South Carolina. And it's something that we need to address. We heard testimony about that today. Now, there are, of course, people who say, well, that's not the problem. There are other issues that are out there. But I think we've narrowed it down to understand there are problems with joint and several that we need to address.
Other issues that are out there. DUI was a big part of the discussion during those hearings. So as they move forward, the Senate chose to extend their hearing until this coming week, well, this current week now, because they wanted to get more public input. Are we going to have a very convoluted plan drawn up here that's going to be intertwining not only insurance issues, but impaired driving issues all in one big ball of wax?
It certainly is looking that way, because when we're talking about tort reform, insurance, liquor liability, plus DUI, which is really what we're trying to get at here, right? And you're trying to fit that into this mold of a single bill and try to get all of this done in one. We're getting layer upon layer upon layer of law. And again, good news for a lot of lawyers, because we're the ones that have to be hired to try to sort all this out, but it's bad news for everyone else, and especially for the small business owner who is trying to figure out how all of this fits together and how it applies to them.
Yeah, good luck to them is what I can say. Something we did get some definitive movement on this week at the State House was the school voucher, lack of a better term, school choice plan that we've been talking about for a decade, probably 2 decades at this point. The Senate on Tuesday, on third reading, approved their plan. It is linked to lottery dollars. That would pay for scholarships for students K through 12 to go to private school should they choose, and their families meet the income requirements. $300 million what they're talking about here in lottery dollars. This now will go to the House, where you and I have talked about this. It could die a painful death.
It could die a very quick and painful death. The Speaker of the House, Merle Smith, out of Sumter County, has basically said, we're not going to start getting into the lottery dollar discussion because there's a constitutional question. Can you use this? We've talked about this for several weeks now here on this show, where you've got those lottery dollars are being spent on 4K and expanding 4K, which is extremely important in getting kids ready for school. It's working on the flip side in higher education, but it's the sandwich. It's the meat in the middle of the sandwich. And the question becomes one of, are we going to turn around and take that money for the 5 to 7% of South Carolina students right now who their families want them to be able to go to private school? So the question becomes one of, are we going to fully fund public education and everybody has to go to public education, or are we going to say that the money basically backpacks with the child? So everywhere that child goes, the dollars that are assigned for that child go with that child to whatever school they want to go to. That's where you have a big debate. We had it here a few weeks ago when we had the SCEA
We sure did.
and
Good
Palmetto
discussion.
Promise. Really great discussion about that. If you didn't see it, go back and take a look at it, because it was a real honest discussion about what are we going to be doing for education. We have more than 800,000 students in South Carolina schools, public school, private school, charter schools. So what are we doing to prepare those students? Because everybody knows, if you're a parent, you're a grandparent, heck, if you're a student, you understand that it is very different for every single student. Think about what goes on in a classroom. There's so many students, so many different ways of learning. But the speaker has basically said, listen, we're not going to turn around and take $300 million in lottery funds and just put it towards this, because this isn't going to happen. So my guess, the guess among the State House chatter is they're going to strike that entire bill, put it in their own bill, and send it back over to the Senate, and it's going to be a debate back and forth, probably end up going to conference committee.
They'll meet in the middle.
Will there be something? Who knows? That's why you stay tuned. But that is the place where This is the boils down to the question, Brian, of whether or not we're going to start looking at funding public education or funding the education of students.
Yep.
And that's a fundamental look at two different sides of that coin.
This new plan is very different than two others that did not meet constitutional muster when they were presented in higher courts. The previous plans were tied to essentially public tax dollars, and it was ruled that public dollars cannot be used for private schools. This is different in that it's lottery money, and that's a product that we all pay with our own money. But there will be legal pushback for certain.
Absolutely. Yeah. The one thing that we know here, no matter what we see struck, no matter how they may meet in the middle, if a bill is passed here, we are going to see another lawsuit. And it's probably going to go all the way back up to the South Carolina Supreme Court. And then at that point, it's anyone's guess what happens. We have heard twice now from the South Carolina Supreme Court that those previous laws did not meet constitutional muster. And as you said, now they're trying to get this through in a different way. They're thinking outside the box and using lottery money for this. And so the question is that still public dollars? It doesn't follow quite the same path as our taxpayer dollars. It's a different concept, so you've got to give them some credit for that, for thinking it up. But with that said, the Supreme Court may turn right back around and say, this is the exact same thing that we've answered twice before. Why do you keep presenting us with slightly tweaked versions of the same thing? And that's assuming that we can get both chambers on board with this, since we already know that at least some are not enthusiastic about that taxpayer or the lottery funding.
Yeah.
I think the other part about that, though, is we have a different Supreme Court now.
That's true.
We have a different makeup. 5 members of the Supreme Court. We have a very different makeup of a Supreme Court. They took a different stance on the pro-life law. They're taking a different stance on several different things. I don't know, how does that play itself out then when lawmakers are looking at that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because this isn't an issue that's come up before this court. And so we don't know. We don't have a strong judicial record from these justices, not from all of them, on how they would fall on this. So it's going to be an interesting question.
Yeah. One other offshoot of this is the fact that some have raised some concerns that there's been a drop in lottery overall sales revenue from 2023 to 2024. We looked up the data. It's about $18 million. That's a lot. That's a lot to all of us. But there are some things in motion now that could generate more sales. The fact that it could be possible for us to then now buy, well, previously it was only cash you could buy lottery tickets with. Now there's wheels in motion that would make you allowed to buy with a debit card.
Well, we live in a digital society. I don't remember, well, with the exception of one time when somebody handed me some cash, the last time I actually had paid for something with cash. We pull out our phones, we pull out our credit cards, we tap them, we're done. Now here's the difference about that, though. There's a difference that you have to look at between a credit card and a debit card. And the reason why they're saying, hey, listen, let's use a debit card, and this is simple bank math. Debit cards actually pull money out of an existing group of funds, out of your checking account, out of a savings account, whatever it might be. So it debits that money out instead of using credit cards, which is basically I'm borrowing money.
Magic money.
Money.
That you do have to pay back.
And you have to pay back with a lot of interest. And so in that particular case, they're saying, no, we don't want to do credit cards because we don't want you to gamble and then pay interest on top of your gambling. But keep in mind, besides some places in bingo, the state of South Carolina has a monopoly on gambling in South Carolina. They are the only legalized gambling in the entire state right now. There's talks about other things possibly coming into the state. But the thing we have to think about here, this is where this debit card rule is coming into play, because if lottery dollars fluctuate up and down, that's money that you can't necessarily guarantee is going to be there. If revenues are down by $18 million, that's a lot of dollars that you don't have to be able to put into funding certain things that state government does. And so in that particular case, they want to make it easier for folks to be able to go out instead of running to the ATM, getting cash, walking in, scratching everything off or penciling everything in, and make it a whole lot easier for you to turn around and buy a lottery ticket or buy whatever it might be, upgrade for your Powerball. That's where that law is coming into play. I think that's probably got some traction because we have totally changed the way that we do our transaction and our money in society today.
No, and very few people carry cash. Now, cash aside, whether this gets through, stay tuned. It will likely require some courts and some judges, which brings us to our last topic this Sunday.
Oh, and that's a
How
convoluted
are
one.
judges chosen in this state? We have a tweet about that from this past week that we do want to show you. This is from State Rep Jackie Tarabeel, questioning some of the votes here. And you look at the big board. There's a lot of red there.
There's
Those
a
are-
there's a
Yeah.
there's a
there's a fair amount of red
there's
there.
there's some red in there, but there's a heck of a lot of green. There's a heck of a lot of yes votes on there. And Brian, I think when you start taking a look at that screen right there, it begs the question: how many of those lawmakers are also lawyers?
A fair amount.
A fair amount. And in South Carolina, legislators vote on who the judges are
They
going to
then
be.
argue cases in front of.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Which again, as a lawyer, I would love. I would love to be able to pick my judges. I would love to be able to put them in their positions on the bench and be able to say, "Hey, I got you on the bench. What are you going to do for
Help
me
me
now?"
out here.
Yeah, exactly. That would be wonderful for a lawyer, but it's not the way things are supposed to be. We're supposed to have a fair and a just judicial system where you recuse yourself if you're in a position of compromise, where it could be an ethical question. And in the South Carolina system, especially up until last year, there were a lot of questions. Up until last year, it was just the lawmakers who were going to be choosing who goes up on the bench. And when you're also a lawyer, it raises those questions. Totally unlike the federal level, where you have an executive branch that really is intrinsically involved in the process, is nominating those judges and justices. They go before the Senate Judiciary Committee. At the federal level, there's an open hearing, a confirmation process, the full Senate votes. And so it's not just these lawmakers who are kind of picking and choosing who they think might rule in their favor in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there were some small changes made a year ago because
Yes.
this selection reform package that was put forth last year. Very subtle changes, though, because like school choice, this has been something that people in the state capitol have been ringing the bell about for more than a decade.
They've been ringing about it for more than a century because when you look at South Carolina, when you look at the history of South Carolina has had a long history of being a legislatively heavy state. Our legislature has been choosing committees, they've been choosing different groups all along, and there's a joint merit selection committee. So basically members of the House, members of the Senate come together. Somebody says, hey, listen, I want to run for judge. I fill out all the forms, and then you may have 5, 7, 10 of them. The joint merit selection committee, which up until last year was totally done by legislators. There was no executive voice in that. There was no community voice in that at all. And so when that takes place, you've got a small group of people who have said, okay, well, we'll choose these 3, and these 3 can then run for the office. Then it goes through an entire process, and you can see it when you go to the State House, especially at the beginning of the year, because they're all standing there with their little badges. I'm running for this particular seat, and they're shaking hands, and they're trying to figure out, can I get enough votes? Because what ends up happening is those 3 names end up there. Usually it breaks down to 2. When it's all said and done, half of them, somebody else has dropped out because they realize they don't have the votes. So maybe I can do this again next time. And that right there puts those lawmakers in a position where they have a level of sway. And I don't know, Catherine, I just don't know how in the world you can turn around and have some level of legal moral authority here to be able to do that. There seems to be like an ethical issue that exists here.
There really is. It's intrinsic to the system, and it's not going to end until we change up how we get people on the bench, how we put those judges in their positions here in this state.
And I don't know if you're going to get 170 men and women at the legislature who are going to turn around and go, oh, we'll just give up power. Sure, we'll give it to the governor.
Not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
In any hall of power.
Well, and, I mean, you take a look at everything else that we've talked about here on this show, because you think about what goes on you hear about government reform. What are we going to do to bring the different mental health and health agencies all together? What are we going to do to bring all of the different areas that have to do with other areas of environmental control and things like that? We didn't have those. We had the Department of Health and Environmental Control, the Department of Mental Health. And so there's a lot of that consolidation and restructuring of government It started in the days of Carroll Campbell in 1991, and some massive changes that took place when the Republicans started getting some level of control with a Republican governor in office. But right now, you still have a system that's in place that really a lot of people, the representative that we just talked about just now, are calling foul on this because so many of those green lights that you saw on that screen just a little while ago, a lot of those green lights are also green lighting themselves into cash in their pockets when they're going before these same judges as lawyers for their clients.
And really, whether we're talking about lawyers, lawmakers, and who gets put on the bench, whether we're talking about any of the other issues that we've addressed today, it's about the dram shop laws and insurance and liability. We're talking about streamlining a process, consolidating where it makes sense, and making sure that the system is fair, listening to all the diverse voices that are part of the community and ensuring that everyone is heard and one person doesn't get unfairly prejudiced, whether we're talking about your small bar or restaurant owner, or whether we're talking about maybe that lawyer who's not serving at the State House.
Yeah.
And so that really boils down to why you watch and what we're talking about here, because how does this boil down and what does it mean for you? For you at home, this is where your votes end up mattering. When we start talking about, did you show up for an election? Did you vote? Keep in mind, in the gubernatorial primary just 2.5 years ago,
yeah, and there's another one coming.
13.9% of people showed up. That means you showed up and the rest of your neighbors around you didn't. And that's a place where we have had a massive shift in the state's General Assembly.
Yep.
So many new members of the House. You've got 13 new members of the Senate. You've got almost 40 new people out of 170. And they're coming in saying, we've got to have some level of reform. And it's a very kind of up and down, nobody's really quite sure how that's working itself out. And so you've got a brand new representative who is sitting here talking about the fact that something on this board doesn't look quite right because 3 lights are on the board: red, white, and green. Red means no, green means yes. That white is, hey, listen, I'm going to recuse myself and I am not going to vote on this because it affects me.
A lot of new voices in this session at the State House that are going to start calling foul on a lot of things. I think, in this particular process, it's kind of like picking your own referees in a sporting event. Like the Super Bowl or something. Later today. That's a story for another day.
No,
that we're not
she's
going to
like, I don't have the helmet to put. I don't have the thing to put on.
It's like picking your own referee.
Who knows?
By the way, you can watch the Super Bowl here on Watch Fox if you didn't know.
Stay a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Just stay a little bit longer. That's
Yeah.
all you have to do. But thank you for spending your Sunday in South Carolina with us as we get you connected to the Capitol. We'll do it again in a week.